12-team Superflex tight end premium. Start 10. Bryce Young for Drake London and the 402. Well, in this case, we've got one guy on the way down, that's Bryce Young, and on the other side, you've got Drake London, who I've been talking about for the past 3 weeks as a buy right now. So I do lean towards the Drake London side in this deal. I definitely was excited to get rid of my Bryce Young share mid last season. Now I know that they did land Dave Canales as their new head coach coming over from Tampa, and he worked his magic last year with Baker and Geno Smith the previous season. So maybe he can pull it off with Bryce Young. I just don't. I don't buy into it right now. I mean, if you're in the situation where you need a quarterback, Bryce Young is definitely somebody that is attainable right now. I just don't know that he's the one I want to attain. I'd be looking somewhere else. But again, if you need somebody that's young and attainable, Bryce Young is that. I don't know. Bryce Young's fallen to status where he's like worth a late first in that area. Drake London's somebody who can definitely rise more in value, especially if Atlanta's able to land somebody like Kirk Cousins this offseason, or potentially draft a good solid young rookie in this upcoming draft. Somebody like Jaden Daniels could fall to them at 8. They could trade up. I've seen many mocks where they trade up to the number 1 overall and grab whichever quarterback they love the most. Even if Michael Penix or J.J. McCarthy falls to them at number 8, or they even move down and grab one of those guys, I'd still see that as a good situation. Atlanta just announced this morning their new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinators coming over with Raheem Morris. They're also coming from the Rams, so you can expect them to run some sort of the McVay offense there, which is exciting. And I look for good things for Drake London and Kyle Pitts this coming season. So again, in this side, I would lean towards the Drake London end of it. Now, I do want to welcome you back to the Birdhouse. We had a little technical difficulty with the last video, so I'm just kind of doing a completion of the trade show and then talk about a little more stuff. But moving along, another deal in that same league, which was 12-team Superflex tight end premium and start 10. This one we had Foss getting Isaiah Pacheco in the 206 for Breece Hall. Breece Hall going over to Brady Flash. Now, I don't know about you, but Breece Hall definitely presents much more stability here in this case than someone like an Isaiah Pacheco. I can understand wanting to get a couple of pieces, get some draft capital in the 206, but Isaiah Pacheco does not present stability. He was a 7th round pick. The guy runs hard as hell every time he touches the ball. But again, there's nothing stopping the Chiefs from drafting a 2nd or 3rd round pick as a running back. There's nothing from stopping them from bringing in another veteran that could eat into his workload. Again, Pacheco runs very hard, and I would expect him to remain in the somewhat of a similar role, but there's no room for expansion. Like what he did this year is probably pretty close to his ceiling. Breece Hall, I'm pretty sure we all can agree, hasn't yet reached what could be his ceiling. With Aaron Rodgers probably coming back next year and taking over for the Jets and running what should be a better offense, I see plenty more scoring opportunities Aaron Rodgers opening it up for Breece Hall. The guy still catches the ball a ton, whereas Pacheco doesn't. You know, I understand getting the 206 in it. I just think that Breece Hall was a little steep, all right, for Pacheco in the 206. Next deal, same guy to start with. That's Foss Boss. He received, this one was a 2-for-1, and he got DK Metcalf and Calvin Ridley. In return, he had to give up to NLS 2K AJ Brown. So it was a full wide receiver swap here, 2-for-1. AJ Brown on one side, DK and Ridley on the other. So one perspective of this has me looking at it like, well, DK could potentially score just about as much as AJ Brown in a particular season. They're basically the same age, came out in the same draft. DK showed that he can get 10 targets a week from time to time, and pop off for that huge game that he did against the Cowboys this year. I just see DK as a very solid wide receiver 2 in your lineups, in super flex leagues. And then Calvin Ridley is still definitely a starter. No one knows where he's going to be next year, whether it's back at Jacksonville or signing with somewhere else, either as the 1 or a very solid number 2 receiver. But I do expect Ridley to be a pretty consistent starter wherever he goes. AJ Brown on the other side, I love AJ Brown, but this year had some turmoil in Philly. Started off the season great. He had those 5 straight weeks of over 125 yards, and one of my teams, that he definitely carried me on that team through those weeks. And he's that guy that as long as you're getting him 10 targets in a week, he's going to produce. So I'm on the fence on this deal, whether one side really won or lost. I can't say that. I could say that both teams win in this instance, especially if you needed a couple of starters at wide receiver. DK and Ridley are decent guys. I mean, 2-3 years down the road, you can look at it and maybe you're still maybe then you're leaning the AJ Brown side, but both AJ Brown and DK in a few years will be, 29, 30. So who knows? But right now, I would say this deal is pretty even. Okay. And then we've got one more deal for you. This was in a 12-team Superflex non-tight end premium start 10 league. In this one, we had Foss Boss once again receiving Justin Fields, Devontae Adams in the 210. In return, he gave to Mr. DI6, Tua, Waddle, and Marvin Mims. So he unloaded the stack of Tua and Waddle plus Marvin Mims and got Fields and Adams in return plus the 210. So you can look at it one way, basically eliminate the 210 and Marvin Mims. They're pretty equal. So then if you're comparing Fields and Adams to Tua and Waddle, I would say it's pretty even on the surface. I definitely prefer Waddle to Adams, and in my case, my opinion, I would rather have Tua over Fields. I did an article a couple of years back, and I talked about quarterbacks and longevity in regards to superflex leagues, and I leaned towards the side of the pocket passer in this particular article. Now I know it's very exciting to have those running quarterbacks, and it's fun to watch, and they do pop off for those big weeks. But there's that downside to those guys. Justin Fields has been banged up. Look at Anthony Richardson this year. It's a high risk, high reward scenario. But going back to that article I did, I showed how Tom Brady outscored both LaDainian Tomlinson and Adrian Peterson for their careers if you total up their fantasy points. Now, I know that if you individualize them and show the war for Adrian Peterson and his value, especially if you go to the LT and look at his value that he presented when they were playing, was enormous. I mean, I know a guy in one of the leagues I was in who won 4 out of 6 years with LT. So he was definitely that league winner. But if you're looking to build around something, you can't go wrong with a solid pocket passer. I mean, look at Kirk Cousins over the last, it's almost 10 years now. In comparison to the guy who was drafted ahead of him on the exact same team, Robert Griffin. All right. Griffin got banged up that first year and fell apart and went out of the league now. Whereas Cousins is as solid as it gets, even at 35, 36 years old now. He's going to be a hot commodity this offseason. Whether the Vikings are able to re-sign him or he goes elsewhere, he's going to put up those numbers. All right. So I look at Tua and I see something similar to that, where he's going to just continue to produce year after year. I don't think he'll ever be a top 5 guy, but in Superflex leagues, he's about as solid as it gets for a quarterback too, especially while he's got Tyreek and Waddle in the fold there. So I would lean towards the Mr. DI6 side on this one. I would prefer the 210 over Marvin Mims, but I mean, they're both kind of back-end throw-ins in this type of deal. And though this first year, Justin Fields and Adams could easily outproduce them, I see Adams' days as an elite receiver nearing the end. He's rumored, to go to the Jets possibly. If he goes there, well, Garrett Wilson's around. I mean, even with Rodgers being there, I don't know how much he can force feed Devontae Adams enough to put him into an elite status as like a top 5 receiver over someone as young and heading into their prime as Garrett Wilson is. So I can see doing it from Boss's side if you really love Justin Fields and his potential, but we don't even know where the guy's going to be quarterbacking next year. So, and I just don't trust him as a passer. I don't know how long his life as a starter in the NFL is going to be, so he's definitely not someone that I personally am buying into. I can understand wanting to maybe go look at, and kick the tires on him because somebody may be frustrated with him, worried about his uncertain situation. I just, Tua is definitely somebody I would rather have. Quarterbacks on my dynasty teams, I want to feel good and comfy and nice and warm so I can sleep at night type of thing with my quarterbacks. So that's what I try to build towards. And that's usually what I recommend if people ask me. That's what I tend to lean towards. So that's it for the trades that I had to talk about, finishing off from what I talked about in championship evening. If you've got any questions, feel free to throw them down in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. We had some Senior Bowl action today, and I'm going to love to talk about that later this week. Marcus Wilson from the Michigan Wolverines, our national champs, popped off today. Sorry, it's Roman Wilson. Jeez. And he by Dana Jeremiah, he had him ranked as a second-round pick. That's what he was rated. We'll see if he pops up into the possible back end of the first territory. There's a lot of receivers clustered into that area right now. I had about 4 or 5 right there. Now I can throw Roman Wilson into the mix. We'll see. The Senior Bowl does provide a lot of good players. Some of those guys who do play their senior year still end up being legit wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, Puka Nakua did all right, so I guess it can be done, right? Also, later this week, I want to talk about the mid area of the draft in the first round, the 107, 108, 109 area, and discuss what you can do with those picks. That seems to be the cusp of the first tier right now, and just what you can do or do not do with those picks. And finally, discuss a little bit about the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator changes that have been going on and their impact on some of our players. All right. So with that, I want to thank you for joining today, and I'm out.